The next thing we're going to take a look at is doing input and output with files. So here we have a very simple Python program that opens a file somewhere on your disk, reads the lines from that file one line at a time, displays those lines, again one line at a time, and then closes the file when done. I've opened that program. It's called disp_file.py in my idle editor over here, and we'll take a look at how this thing works. Now, in order to access the contents of a file, you have to open the file. Python provides open as a built-in function, and open takes various arguments. The first argument is what's called the path name of the file that you want to read data from. If the file that you want to read data from is in the very same directory in which you are running your Python environment, then you can simply specify the name of the file that's in that same directory. Here we're supposing that I have a file named infile.txt in my same directory that I'm currently running my Python environment in. I don't actually have that file in my directory, so in that case what I need to do is to specify something called the path, that is the sequence of directories leading up to that file that I want to open. And the path here can be typed using slashes between the directory levels, either on Windows or on a Mac or on Linux. So you can use the / as a directory separator in any operating system. Now, the backslashes you can use in Windows, for example, and I presume these will also work in Mac or Linux. The problem with using backslashes is you have to remember to double them, because the backslash, recall, is used to introduce or to indicate a special character like a new line character or a horizontal tab character or something like that. So it's much more convenient to just go ahead and use / rather than having to remember to type pairs of backslashes between the directories in a path name. Now, I happen to have a directory on my system named, let's see, users J Ostland pp2019_examples. Okay, so that is a directory that I do have on my Windows machine, and that does contain example programs that I've saved, and also contains some input files that I can use. In fact, if you look up here, you may not be able to see this very well, but you'll see in the top line of my editor, this particular program file that I'm editing is /users/jostland /pp2019_examples dispfile.py. So I want to open a file that happens to be in the same directory that my program lives in. Now, saying that the program lives in this directory does not mean that this is the current directory of my overall Python environment. It's just a directory where I am choosing to store program files and data files for the examples that I'm looking at. I don't happen to have a file whose name is infile.txt, but I do have a file whose name is expenses.txt. And let's confirm that. Here's my directory. I want to go to, I want to go to my C drive. And within the C drive, I will go to users, jostland, and here is my PP 2019 examples directory, and in here I do have a text file whose name is expenses.txt. So that file does exist, and it does exist in the directory where I claimed it should. Okay, so we're going to open that file. Now, we want this file to be an input file rather than an output file. So the next argument that we specify to the open function tells the type of access that we want and whether this is a binary file or a text file. So R here means that I want to read from this file. If I used a W, that would mean that I want to write to the file, and in that case, in fact, the contents of the file would be overwritten. So I need to be careful to use R here rather than W because I want to read this file. This is also a text file as opposed to a binary data file, so that's why I have the little t. Okay, so RT is a code that will let you open an input file for reading text. The third argument that I give here specifies the character set in which this text file is encoded. My file is actually an ASCII file, but ASCII, as I've said, is a subset of 1 byte UTF-8 Unicode character set. So I'm going to say encoding is, quote, UTF-8, quote. So that's how I specify that this is a UTF-8 file, which includes ASCII as a subset. All right, well, presumably that open function will work. We'll find out in just a moment here. And if the open function works, I will get back from open something called a file handle or an input file object. So I'm calling that thing fin file input. All I want to do with this file that I've opened is to step through the lines in the file and display them. It turns out that an input file object opened this way is an iterable, which means that I can process the input from that file using a for loop. And in fact, each item that I read from this input file is a line of text. The next line of text up to including the new line character that concludes the line of text. So I'm saying for line in fin. Line is a variable name that I chose here. It's not a keyword. It's not required to use line here. I could have said for X in fin or for abracadabra in fin. But it's meaningful to me to think of each line of input as a line. So I'm saying for line in this iterable, the input file. And what I'm going to do with each of these lines is to simply print the line out to the screen. When I'm done reading my input file, I should be sure to close that input file so that later on in my program, if my program were longer, I could open the file again to read from it again. Once you have traversed your way through an input file using something like a for loop, you cannot then just continue reading from that same file all over again because you're at the end of the file. And if you continue trying to read from the file, each time you try to read, you'll get nothing, 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 nothing. So what we need to do, or what we can do, is to close the file so that later on, if I want to process the contents of that file again, I can open the file again, and that will start me over from the beginning of the file. All right, so that was a fairly long-winded description of a pretty simple program. Let me save the changes that I've made, namely typing in the directory where my input file is stored. So let me save that, and now we will run the program. And okay, we get output. The output, this file contains a sequence of expense records for expenses that occurred in February and March during 2017, during the year 2017. And the first line is a line describing what the fields are in each of these lines. Then we have data lines for each expense. And for some reason, you'll notice that these things are being double-spaced in the output, whereas they are not double-spaced in the input file. Let's confirm that. I'm going to pull up this is an application called Cygwin, or this, I should say, is a terminal in a package called Cygwin. And let me go to users, J. Ostland, PP 2019 examples. All right, so this is a Linux-like terminal environment, and ls lists the files that I have, and I can look at the expenses file by using a pagination command called more. All right, so here is what the actual contents of the expenses file looks like. You can see that in the actual file, these are single-spaced, and yet for some reason in the output, they're appearing as double-spaced. The reason that they're appearing as double-spaced is because the new line character is included in each line read from the input, and when I print a line, the print function automatically adds a new line character to the output. Consequently, each line comes out exactly as it was read in, that is, the line of text with a new line, and then the print function is adding another new line. So the upshot is it appears that all of this information is double-spaced. I want to avoid that double spacing. In particular, to make these lines easy to process, what I want to do is to eliminate the new line character from the end of each line that I read in. I'm going to do that by adding one simple line of code here. For each line of input that I read from my input file, I'm going to strip off the new line character by taking a slice of the input line that includes all of the characters from character sub 0 up to but not including the very last character on the line. Now, because of the way the for loop works and because of the way reading lines from the input file works, line is guaranteed to end with a new line character from each line in the text file. And so it's easy for me to strip off that new line character by saying, just give me the slice of the line that includes everything except for that last character. And then when I print that line out, I will get the contents of the line apart from the new line with a new line added. So the effect is to avoid double spacing the output. Let me switch back to my program file, and we're going to make that modification. Okay, this file is going to be disp file no nl, no new line. And the only thing I need to do here is to say line gets. Recall that a string is immutable. So I'm not actually modifying the input string here. What I'm doing is I'm taking a slice of the input string up to but not including the last character, and I'm changing the variable name line to refer to that slice rather than to the original input line. Okay, now when I save this, I'm changing the name, so let me do a save as disp file no nl, no new line. And now when I run this, I no longer have the output double spaced. All right, so when you are processing text, this is a very common trick to need to use here, is to strip off the new line character from the end of each line of input. Finally, you might wish to create an output file containing the result of some processing. Using the open command, we can create an output file. The only thing we need to change is make the R into a W. So the way that we are opening the file here is to write to the file some text. The first argument to the open function is the path name and the name of the output file that you want, then WT, and then here we're specifying an encoding of UTF-8, which in my case is going to include ASCII as a subset. Let's take a look at this program. So here is my create file program. Now, path is not correct. I need to, again, change that to what is correct for my system. So that's going to be users J. Ostland PP 2019 underscore examples. And I will just call this thing outfile.txt. In order to write data into an output file, you have to use your output file handle, and you can invoke the write method, W-R-I-T-E. Whatever you have as string arguments to the write method will simply be written out to the output file. Now you need to be very careful then to close the output file when you are done producing that output into the file, because if your program ends without having done a close, you may discover that your output file is incomplete. Some of the output that you wrote to the file may be still hanging around in the memory of your Python program and just get flushed away and not written if you forget to do your close. All right, so let me run this program now. I'm going to save the changes that I made to the path, and I will say run module. Okay, now in my interactive shell window, I don't see anything because all of the output produced by this program was, at least in theory, written into this output file called outfile.txt. Let me switch back to my terminal, my Cygwin terminal, and let's see whether in fact that is true. Yes, here I have a file named outfile.txt, and if I look at that with my pagination program more, I see, this is an output file containing 4 lines. All right, if we look at the program, notice that what we have here is a string. By the way, this is just a long string. Notice that we have a single quote here at the end of this is an output file. And we don't have any other symbols like plus or times or comma or whatever. We simply have another quote mark on the next line down. If you type a string immediately followed by another string, that is an implicit concatenation of the two strings. Okay, so if I say this is a string, notice I'm doing this in parentheses so that I can type my input across multiple physical lines. And this is a continuation of the same string. All right, so I have now typed one long line split across 3 separate physical lines by using the implicit concatenation of strings. I'm going to have just one long string now from that input that I typed. So that's the same thing that's going on here in the write function that we're using to create output into fout. New line \n creates a new line character in the output file. So because I have 4 new line characters here, I do get a file containing 4 lines of text. And then I've successfully closed the file.